I woke up that Thursday morning to the sound of Roosevelt crowing at 5:30, just like he had every morning for the past 3 years. And I smiled because it meant everything was right with the world until I saw 3 police cars pulling into my driveway. My name is Brennan, and I had been living on my 10-acre property in rural Sussex County, Delaware, for almost 5 years. The land had been classified as agricultural when I bought it, complete with a small barn, chicken coops, and enough space to raise a modest collection of livestock. I had 6 chickens, 2 goats, Roosevelt the rooster, and a couple of ducks that spent most of their time in the pond at the back of the property. It was peaceful, quiet, and exactly what I needed after spending 15 years working in corporate finance in Wilmington. I pulled on my jeans and a flannel shirt, confused as hell about why 3 patrol cars were now parked in front of my house. Through the window, I could see 4 officers getting out of their vehicles, and one of them was talking on his radio. My heart started pounding. Had something happened? Was there an emergency? I rushed to the front door and opened it before they could knock. The lead officer, a tall guy with graying hair and a name tag that read Patterson, looked almost embarrassed. "Derek Brennan," he asked. "That's me. What's going on? Is everything okay?" Officer Patterson sighed and glanced at his colleagues before looking back at me. "Sir, we received a complaint about a disturbance on your property, specifically about a rooster that's been crowing early in the morning and disturbing the peace." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I laughed. "You're joking, right? You sent 3 cars out here because of my rooster. Sir, we have to respond to all complaints. The individual who filed the report was very insistent that we take action immediately." He looked down at his notepad. "A Mrs. Patricia Whitmore from the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. She claims your rooster has been creating a public nuisance for months, and that you've refused to address the situation despite multiple warnings." Multiple warnings. I've never spoken to anyone named Patricia Whitmore in my life. And Meadowbrook Heights HOA, that's the new development they built 2 miles down the road last year. I'm not part of any HOA. This is private agricultural land. Officer Patterson looked uncomfortable. "Sir, Mrs. Whitmore claims that your property falls within the extended jurisdiction of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA due to recent boundary adjustments approved by the county." "That's complete nonsense," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "I own this land outright. It's been designated agricultural since the 70s. No HOA has any authority over what I do on my property." One of the younger officers stepped forward. "Sir, regardless of the HOA situation, there are county ordinances regarding noise disturbances. If your rooster is crowing early enough to disturb neighbors, we may have to issue a citation. My nearest neighbor is over a mile away in one direction and 2 miles in the other. That's the HOA development. How exactly is my rooster disturbing anyone?" Officer Patterson held up his hand. "Look, Mr. Brennan, I agree this seems unusual, but we have to follow protocol. Mrs. Whitmore has filed an official complaint and we need to document the situation. Can we take a look at your rooster?" I wanted to argue, but I could see this wasn't the officer's fault. They were just doing their jobs. "Fine. Come around back." I led all 4 officers around the side of my house to the area where I kept the chickens. Roosevelt was a beautiful Rhode Island red rooster with glossy bronze feathers and a proud bearing. When he saw us approaching, he puffed up his chest and let out a loud crow, as if to demonstrate exactly what all the fuss was about. "That's Roosevelt," I said. "He's 3 years old, healthy, and doing exactly what roosters are supposed to do. He crows at dawn, which is completely natural behavior." Officer Patterson was writing in his notebook. What time does he typically start crowing? Around 5:30, give or take. Sometimes earlier in the summer when the sun comes up sooner. The younger officer was looking around the property, taking in the chicken coops, the barn, and the fenced pasture where my goats were grazing. This is quite a setup you have here. You run a farm. Small scale, I said. I have chickens for eggs, the goats for milk and cheese, some vegetables in the garden. It's all legal under my agricultural land classification. I file the appropriate tax forms every year. Officer Patterson closed his notebook. Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be straight with you. This complaint is ridiculous. You're clearly operating a legitimate small farm on properly zoned agricultural land. However, Mrs. Whitmore was very adamant that we take action. She's threatening to go to the county commissioner, the state agriculture department, and anyone else who will listen. Let her, I said. I'm not getting rid of my rooster because some HOA busybody moved next to farmland and doesn't like farm noises. I don't blame you, Officer Patterson said, but be prepared. In my experience, people like Mrs. Whitmore don't give up easily. You might want to gather your property documents, your agricultural classification papers, anything that proves your legal right to raise livestock on this land. I have everything, I assured him. This isn't my first rodeo. When I bought this place, I made sure all my paperwork was in order specifically so I could raise animals without any issues. The officers left after taking a few photos and finishing their report. Officer Patterson gave me his card and told me to call if I had any problems. I stood in my driveway, watching the patrol cars pull away, and felt a cold knot of anger forming in my stomach. I had moved out here specifically to get away from the kind of petty nonsense that came with suburban living, and now someone was trying to drag that drama onto my property. I spent the rest of the morning doing my usual chores, feeding the animals, collecting eggs, and checking on the garden, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. At around 11, I was in the barn organizing feed bags when I heard a car coming up the driveway. I walked outside to see a silver Mercedes SUV parked near my house, and a woman in her mid-50s climbing out. She was wearing expensive-looking athleisure wear and oversized sunglasses, and she walked toward me with the kind of purposeful stride that screamed trouble. "Are you Derek Brennan?" She called out before she was even close enough for normal conversation. "That's me. And you are Patricia Whitmore, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association." She stopped about 10 feet away and crossed her arms. "I assume the police spoke with you this morning about your noise violation. You mean about my rooster, the one that's been living on my agricultural property long before your development existed," her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Brennan, I don't appreciate your tone. The Meadowbrook Heights community represents a significant investment for our residents. We paid premium prices for our homes based on the promise of a peaceful, upscale living environment. Your farm animals are creating a nuisance that's affecting our quality of life and potentially our property values." I had to take a deep breath to keep from laughing in her face. "Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, I don't care. This is private property, legally zoned for agricultural use. I'm operating well within my rights. If your residents don't like hearing a rooster crow, maybe they shouldn't have bought houses next to farmland." "That's where you're wrong," she said, pulling a folder from her designer handbag. 2 months ago, the Sussex County Council approved an expansion of HOA jurisdiction boundaries to include properties within a 3-mile radius of established developments. This was done to protect community standards and property values. Your land now falls under our oversight. I took the papers she was holding out and scanned them quickly. It was some kind of county resolution with a lot of legal language. "This is garbage," I said. You can't just decide to take control of property you don't own. It's already done, Patricia said smugly. And as of now, you're in violation of Meadowbrook Heights community standards, specifically Section 12, subsection 4, which prohibits the keeping of livestock that create excessive noise. You have 30 days to remove the rooster and any other animals that might cause similar disturbances. Or what? Or the HOA will pursue legal action, including daily fines and potential seizure of the offending animals. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I strongly suggest you comply, Mr. Brennan. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA has significant resources and an excellent legal team. We don't lose. She turned and walked back to her Mercedes before I could respond. I stood there holding the papers, watching her drive away, and felt that cold anger turn into something hot and fierce. This woman had no idea who she was messing with. I spent the afternoon on the phone. First, I called my lawyer, Tom Richardson, who had handled the purchase of my property and all the subsequent legal work. He listened to my explanation and asked me to email him copies of the papers Patricia had given me. "Derek, this sounds like overreach," he said after a few minutes. Even if the county did pass some kind of resolution about HOA boundaries, they can't override existing property rights or agricultural designations. Your land was classified as agricultural decades before this HOA existed. That classification comes with specific protections under Delaware law. So what do I do? Send me everything you have. I'll research this resolution and see what the actual legal language says. In the meantime, don't remove any animals, don't sign anything, and don't agree to any meetings with the HOA without me present. What about the 30-day deadline? Tom laughed. That's probably meaningless. HOAs love to throw around deadlines and threats, but they can't just impose rules on non-members. You're not part of their association, you never signed their covenant, and you have legal protection under your agricultural designation. Let me handle this. I felt slightly better after hanging up with Tom, but I was still furious. I had worked hard to build my little farm, and I loved my quiet life out here. The idea that some HOA could swoop in and try to control what I did on my own land was infuriating. The next morning, Roosevelt crowed right on schedule. I was already awake, making coffee and watching the sun come up over the fields. At around 6:30, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. "Hello. Mr. Brennan, this is Cindy from the Sussex County Code Enforcement Office. I'm calling to inform you that we've received a complaint about possible zoning violations on your property at 1847 Harvest Road. We need to schedule an inspection." "What kind of violations?" "The complaint alleges that you're operating a commercial farming operation on residentially zoned land without proper permits." I felt my jaw clench. "My land is zoned agricultural, not residential. I have all my permits. This is harassment." "Sir, I'm just doing my job." "We have to investigate all complaints. Can you meet with an inspector on Monday at 10? I agreed because I didn't have much choice, but I called Tom immediately after hanging up. He wasn't surprised. "The HOA is trying to create a paper trail," he explained. "They're filing complaints with every county office they can think of, hoping something will stick. Don't worry. When the inspector comes, show them your agricultural classification, your permits, your tax records. Everything you have that proves this is a legitimate farm operation." "It's a small farm, Tom. I'm not running a commercial operation." "Doesn't matter. Under Delaware law, even hobby farms on agricultural land have protection. The key is that your property is properly classified. That classification exists for a reason, and it can't be overridden by an HOA or a county resolution." That weekend was tense. I kept expecting to see Patricia's Mercedes coming up the driveway again, or more police cars or county officials. Roosevelt crowed every morning, and I found myself lying awake listening for it, half afraid and half defiant. This was my rooster, my land, my life. I wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA president take it away. Monday morning came, and right at 10 o'clock, a county inspector arrived. Her name was Janet Morrison, and she was a pleasant woman in her 40s who immediately put me at ease. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be honest with you," she said after I showed her around the property. "This complaint is nonsense. Your land is clearly agricultural. You have all the right permits, and you're operating well within the parameters of the law. I don't know what the HOA is trying to accomplish, but you're not in violation of any county codes. Can you tell them that? I'll file my report, which will show no violations found, but that probably won't stop them. HOAs can be very persistent, especially when they think property values are at stake." She paused. "Off the record, I grew up on a farm. Roosters crow. That's what they do. Anyone who moves next to agricultural land and then complains about farm noises is either ignorant or entitled. Probably both." I thanked her and felt a small weight lift off my shoulders. At least the county inspection was done, and I had passed with flying colors. Tom called later that afternoon with more good news. "I've been through that county resolution," he said. "It's mostly garbage. Yes, the county council did pass something about HOA boundaries, but it only applies to properties that are already within incorporated developments or subdivisions. Your land is neither. It's an independent parcel with its own designation. The HOA has zero authority over you. So what happens now? Now we wait for them to make their next move. My guess is they'll try to fine you anyway, hoping you won't fight it. When they do, we'll respond with a cease and desist letter. If they push further, we can sue for harassment." I didn't have to wait long. On Wednesday, I received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. Inside was an official notice of violation and a fine schedule. According to the letter, I was being fined $500 for the initial violation, plus $100 per day until the rooster was removed. The total so far was apparently $3,000, dating back to when they claimed I first received notice of the new regulations. $3,000, I said aloud, staring at the paper. Roosevelt chose that moment to crow from the backyard, as if he was commenting on the absurdity. I scanned the letter and emailed it to Tom. He called me back within an hour, and I could hear the anger in his voice. "This is illegal," he said flatly. "They can't fine you for anything. You're not a member of their HOA. I'm drafting a cease and desist letter right now. This is going to very clearly explain to Mrs. Whitmore and her board that they have no legal authority over your property and that any further harassment will result in a lawsuit. How much is this going to cost me? Don't worry about that right now. Let's shut this down first. If it goes to court, we can ask for legal fees to be covered by the HOA for frivolous litigation." Tom's letter went out the next day via certified mail and email. I got a copy, and it was beautifully written, clearly laying out all the legal reasons why the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property and warning them that continued harassment would result in legal action. I felt confident that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The following Monday, I came home from a trip to the feed store to find a truck from an animal control service parked in my driveway. Two men in uniforms were walking around my property, and one of them was taking photos of my chicken coop. I parked quickly and jumped out of my truck. "What the hell is going on?" The older of the two men turned to me. "Are you the property owner?" "Yes." "Derek Brennan. Who are you and what are you doing on my land?" We're with Tri-State Animal Control. We received a report of potential animal welfare violations at this address. We're conducting an investigation. Animal welfare violations. My animals are perfectly healthy. You can't just come onto my property without permission. Actually, sir, under Delaware law, animal control officers can enter property when investigating potential abuse or neglect. We don't need a warrant. I was furious but tried to keep my voice level. Fine. Investigate. You'll see that every animal here is well cared for, properly fed, and has clean water and shelter. But I want to know who filed this report. The younger officer glanced at his clipboard. The complaint came from a Patricia Whitmore. She claimed that livestock on this property were being kept in inhumane conditions. Of course it was Patricia. I followed the officers as they inspected every part of my small farm. They checked the chicken coop, the barn, the pasture where the goats stayed, even the duck pond. They took photos, made notes, and occasionally asked me questions about feeding schedules and veterinary care. Through it all, I kept my cool, answering everything honestly and providing documentation where I could. After about an hour, the older officer came up to me and shook his head. "Mr. Brennan, your animals are in excellent condition. The facilities are clean. Everyone appears healthy and well fed. There's absolutely no evidence of neglect or abuse. I'll be filing a report that says this complaint was unfounded. Can you do anything about false complaints?" Unfortunately, no. People are allowed to report concerns. But I'll make a note in my report that this appears to be a malicious complaint. If it happens again, there might be grounds for harassment charges. After they left, I called Tom again. He was starting to sound as frustrated as I felt. "She's escalating," he said. "First the police, then code enforcement, now animal control. She's trying to harass you into giving up. The good news is that you're passing every inspection and investigation. The bad news is she's not going to stop. So what do? We can file for a restraining order based on harassment. We can also send another letter threatening immediate legal action. But honestly, Derek, I think this is going to end up in court one way or another. She's not backing down, and neither are you." "You're damn right I'm not backing down. This is my property." "Then let's prepare for a fight. Start documenting everything. Every letter, every visit, every phone call. Take photos of your animals and facilities daily. Keep all your receipts for feed and veterinary care. We need to build an ironclad case that you're a legitimate farmer operating legally on agricultural land, and that the HOA is engaged in a targeted harassment campaign." Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Patricia sent me 3 more violation notices, each with increasing fine amounts. The total was now up to $15,000 according to her accounting. I received 2 more visits from police officers responding to noise complaints, though both times the officers were apologetic and clearly thought the complaints were ridiculous. Someone from the county health department came to inspect my property for potential health code violations related to keeping livestock. Like all the others, they found nothing wrong. Tom sent multiple cease and desist letters. Patricia ignored all of them and responded with increasingly aggressive letters of her own, threatening to place a lien on my property for unpaid HOA fines. Tom assured me the lien would be invalid, but just the threat of it was stressful. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in early June. I woke up to Roosevelt crowing and looked out my window to see not just Patricia's Mercedes, but 3 other cars parked in my driveway. I pulled on clothes and went outside to find Patricia and 4 other people, 2 men and 2 women, all dressed in business casual and all looking at my property with expressions of disgust. "What is this?" I demanded. This is an official HOA board inspection, Patricia announced. As the property in question now falls under our jurisdiction, we have the right to conduct periodic inspections to ensure compliance with community standards. Get off my property. Now, all of you. One of the men stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of fake tan and white teeth that screamed money and arrogance. Mr. Brennan, I'm Richard Colton, the HOA Vice President and Legal Counsel. I strongly advise you to cooperate with this inspection. Your continued violations are creating significant issues for our community, and we're prepared to take whatever legal action is necessary. I don't care who you are. This is private property and you're all trespassing. Leave now or I'm calling the police. Patricia laughed. Call them. We've been in communication with the Sussex County Sheriff's Department. They're aware of the situation and support our efforts to maintain community standards. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, I explained that I had multiple trespassers on my property who were refusing to leave. She said she would send officers immediately. You're making a mistake, Richard said. We're trying to resolve this civilly. If you force us to take legal action, the costs are going to be significant. Not just the fines, but legal fees, court costs. You could lose your property over this. You can't take my property because of a rooster, I shot back. This is agricultural land. I have every legal right to raise livestock here. You're the ones who are going to end up in legal trouble for harassment and trespassing. 2 patrol cars arrived about 10 minutes later. Officer Patterson was in the first one, and he looked tired when he saw Patricia and her group. Mrs. Whitmore, he said with a sigh. What's going on now, officer? We're conducting an official HOA inspection and Mr. Brennan is refusing to cooperate. Madam, this isn't HOA property. Mr. Brennan is right. You're trespassing. But the county resolution doesn't give you the right to enter private property without permission. Officer Patterson looked at me. Mr. Brennan, do you want to press charges? I was tempted, but Tom's advice echoed in my head. Document everything. Build a case. Not today, I said. But I wanted on record that they were here without permission and refused to leave when asked. Officer Patterson nodded and turned to Patricia and her group. All of you need to leave now. If you come back without permission, Mr. Brennan can and should press trespassing charges. They left, but Patricia shot me a look of pure hatred as she got into her Mercedes. This isn't over, she said. No, it's not, I agreed. See you in court. Tom filed a lawsuit the next day. We were suing the Meadowbrook Heights HOA for harassment, illegal fines, trespassing, and emotional distress. The filing made it clear that I was operating a legitimate agricultural operation on properly zoned land, that I had never been a member of the HOA, and that all their actions were without legal basis. We were asking for all the fines to be dismissed, for a permanent restraining order preventing the HOA from contacting me or entering my property, and for damages to cover my legal fees and the stress of dealing with months of harassment. The HOA responded with their own lawsuit, claiming I was operating a nuisance property that was damaging their members' quality of life and property values. They were asking for an injunction to force me to remove all livestock, particularly the rooster, and for me to pay all the accumulated fines plus their legal costs. Both cases were scheduled to be heard together in Sussex County Superior Court in August. That gave me about 8 weeks to prepare. Tom assured me we had a strong case, but I was still nervous. I had heard horror stories about HOAs wielding tremendous power, about homeowners losing their properties over minor violations. But I also knew I was in the right, and I had documentation to prove it. I spent those 8 weeks living my normal life as much as possible. Roosevelt crowed every morning. I collected eggs, made cheese from goat milk, tended my garden, but every day felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I half expected Patricia to show up with a bulldozer to tear down my chicken coop, or with animal control to seize Roosevelt by force. Tom spent those weeks building our case. He gathered all my property documents, tax records, agricultural permits, and correspondence with the HOA. He got statements from the police officers who had responded to the noise complaints, from the code enforcement inspector, from the animal control officers. He researched Delaware agricultural protection laws and found multiple statutes and precedents that supported my position. He even found cases where courts had ruled against HOAs that tried to expand their authority over non-member properties. The hearing was scheduled for August 15th at 9 in the morning. I barely slept the night before. I kept thinking about everything I could lose. My home, my animals, my peace of mind. This little farm was everything to me, and the idea that it could be taken away because of a rooster crowing was surreal and terrifying. I met Tom at the courthouse at 8:30. He was carrying 2 large boxes full of documents and looked confident. "We've got this," he said. "Their case is built on sand. Ours is built on solid legal ground. I hope you're right." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Foster, had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. Patricia was there with Richard Colton and another lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. They had their own boxes of documents and looked equally confident. Judge Foster called the court to order and asked both sides to present their opening statements. Richard went first, painting a picture of a peaceful residential community being disrupted by my commercial farming operation. He claimed that Roosevelt's crowing was disturbing dozens of families, that the smell from my animals was creating health concerns, and that my refusal to comply with reasonable community standards was selfish and damaging. Tom's opening statement was calm and factual. He laid out the history of my property, its agricultural designation, and the timeline of the HOA's harassment campaign. He emphasized that I had never been a member of the HOA, had never signed their covenant, and was operating legally within the bounds of Delaware agricultural law. The HOA presented their case first. They called several residents of Meadowbrook Heights who testified about hearing the rooster crow early in the morning. One woman, a blonde in her 30s who looked like she had never woken up before 9 in her life, claimed that Roosevelt's crowing was so loud it shook her windows and gave her migraines. "How far is your house from Mr. Brennan's property?" Tom asked during cross-examination. "I don't know exactly," she admitted. "Would you say more than a mile?" "I'm not sure." Tom pulled out a map. "According to county records, your property is 2.3 miles from Mr. Brennan's farm. Are you really claiming you can hear a rooster from that distance?" She hesitated. "Well, sound carries. Did you ever hear any roosters before the HOA began its campaign against Mr. Brennan?" "I don't remember." "Did the HOA perhaps suggest you come testify today?" Mrs. Whitmore mentioned that they needed people to explain the impact. Tom let that hang in the air. Several more residents testified with similar stories, and Tom methodically picked apart each one, demonstrating that most of them lived too far away to actually be disturbed by a rooster, and that several had moved into the area well after I had established my farm. Patricia herself testified, describing me as an obstinate and unreasonable neighbor who refused to make simple accommodations for the community's peace. She claimed that property values in Meadowbrook Heights had dropped because of my farm, though she couldn't provide any actual evidence of this. She insisted that the county resolution gave the HOA authority over my property, and that I was legally obligated to comply with their standards. Tom's cross-examination of Patricia was a thing of beauty. "Mrs. Whitmore, when did the Meadowbrook Heights development begin construction?" "About 3 years ago." "And when did residents start moving in?" "About 2 years ago." "And how long has Mr. Brennan owned his property?" "I believe he said 5 years." "So his farm was established before your development existed?" "Yes, and his land is zoned agricultural, correct?" "According to his paperwork, yes." "Not according to his paperwork. According to Sussex County zoning records, it's a legal designation, isn't it?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "Yes." "And did anyone from the Meadowbrook Heights development inform prospective buyers that they would be living near an active farm?" "The farm wasn't creating problems then." "That's not what I asked. Did you inform buyers that there was a farm nearby?" "It wasn't relevant." "So you sold expensive homes in a development 2 miles from a farm, didn't inform the buyers, and now you're trying to shut down the farm because your residents don't like farm noises. Mr. Brennan's rooster is creating a nuisance." "For whom?" "Your witnesses couldn't even accurately describe how far they live from his property. Several of them admitted they only heard about the rooster after you started your campaign against him." Patricia was flustered now. "Our community has standards. Standards that Mr. Brennan never agreed to." "He's not a member of your HOA, is he?" "The county resolution, we'll get to that. Answer the question. Is Mr. Brennan a member of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA? Not technically, but yes or no, Mrs. Whitmore?" "No, thank you." Richard tried to salvage things by presenting the county resolution and arguing that it gave the HOA expanded authority. Tom countered by calling an expert witness, a county planning official who explained that the resolution only applied to properties within incorporated developments and had no bearing on independent agricultural parcels. "So the HOA's interpretation of this resolution is incorrect?" Tom asked. "Yes, they have no authority over Mr. Brennan's property under this or any other county regulation." Tom then presented our case. He walked through my property documents, agricultural designation, permits, and tax records. He showed photos of my well-maintained facilities and healthy animals. He presented statements from the code enforcement inspector, the animal control officers, and multiple police officers who had found no violations or problems. He called me to the stand, and I testified about buying the property, establishing the farm, and the months of harassment from the HOA. I described the police visits, the inspections, the threatening letters, and the trespassing incident. "Why do you keep a rooster?" Tom asked. "Roosters protect the hens," I explained. "They watch for predators, keep the flock organized. Roosevelt is good at his job. My chickens are safer and healthier with him around. And the crowing, it's natural rooster behavior. They crow at dawn. Anyone who lives in a rural area knows this. It's just part of having chickens." "Has anyone ever complained to you directly about the rooster before the HOA started their campaign?" "Never. I've talked to my actual neighbors, the ones who live close enough to possibly hear him. None of them have a problem with it. One of them even said she likes hearing the rooster because it reminds her of growing up on her grandparents' farm." Tom wrapped up by presenting Delaware's Right to Farm Act, a state law that protects agricultural operations from nuisance lawsuits as long as they're following proper practices and regulations. "Your Honor," he said, "this law exists specifically to prevent situations like this. Mr. Brennan is operating a legitimate farm on properly zoned agricultural land. He's following all regulations, his animals are well cared for, and he's not creating any genuine nuisance. The HOA is attempting to abuse the legal system to force him off his land simply because they don't like having a farm nearby. This is exactly the kind of overreach that the Right to Farm Act was designed to prevent. The HOA's attorney tried to argue that the Right to Farm Act didn't apply because my operation was too small to be considered a real farm. But Judge Foster didn't look convinced. She asked several pointed questions about the HOA's authority and the evidence of actual damage to the community. After both sides finished their presentations, Judge Foster called a recess to review the materials. Tom and I went to a diner across the street and tried to eat lunch, though I was too nervous to manage more than a few bites of a sandwich. "How do you think it went?" I asked. "I think it went well. Judge Foster seemed skeptical of their claims and our documentation is solid, but you never know with judges. Sometimes they surprise you." We went back to the courthouse at 2. Judge Foster returned to the bench at 2:30, and I felt my heart pounding as she looked at both legal teams. "I've reviewed all the materials presented today," she began. "This is a case that should never have come to court. Mr. Brennan is operating a legitimate agricultural operation on land that has been properly zoned for that purpose for decades. He has all the necessary permits and licenses. His animals are well cared for. He is not in violation of any county ordinances or state laws." I felt Tom relax slightly beside me. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA, on the other hand, has engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment against Mr. Brennan. They have filed false complaints with multiple county agencies. They have issued fines they have no legal authority to impose. They have trespassed on his property, and they have wasted this court's time with a frivolous lawsuit. Patricia's face was turning red. The county resolution that the HOA cites does not give them authority over independent agricultural properties. Their interpretation of this resolution is not just wrong, it's absurdly wrong. Any competent lawyer should have been able to determine that. Judge Foster looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Colton, you're listed as the HOA's legal counsel. Did you advise your client that they had no legal basis for their actions against Mr. Brennan?" Richard stood up. "Your Honor, we believed the county resolution. I don't want to hear about what you believed. I want to know if you actually researched the law or if you just told your client what they wanted to hear." Richard sat down and said nothing. Judge Foster continued. "The Right to Farm Act is clear. Agricultural operations on properly zoned land are protected from nuisance complaints as long as they're following standard practices. Mr. Brennan is clearly protected under this law. The HOA's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice." I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost fell out of my chair. "Furthermore," Judge Foster said, "I'm granting Mr. Brennan's request for a permanent restraining order. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA and all its agents are prohibited from contacting Mr. Brennan, entering his property, or taking any action against him or his farm. Any violation of this order will result in contempt charges." Patricia stood up. "Your Honor, this is—" "Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm not finished." Judge Foster's voice was ice cold. "I'm also ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Brennan's legal fees. I'm dismissing all the fines they've attempted to impose, and I'm referring this matter to the county prosecutor's office for potential charges of harassment and filing false reports." The courtroom was silent. "Mr. Brennan, you're free to continue operating your farm without interference. I apologize that you had to go through this ordeal. The HOA acted improperly and they're going to face consequences for it." Judge Foster banged her gavel. "We're adjourned." I sat there for a moment trying to process what had just happened. Tom was grinning and shaking my hand. "We won. Clean sweep. Complete victory." Patricia and her lawyers were gathering their materials quickly, looking shell-shocked. As they headed for the door, Patricia turned and glared at me one more time. I just smiled and gave her a little wave. Outside the courthouse, Tom explained what would happen next. The HOA would have to pay my legal fees, which had amounted to about $12,000. The restraining order was permanent and enforceable. And the referral to the prosecutor meant that Patricia and possibly other HOA board members could face criminal charges. What kind of charges? I asked. Depends on what the prosecutor finds. Could be harassment, filing false reports, abuse of process. If they're really unlucky, maybe even attempted extortion for the illegal fines. This is serious stuff, Derek. Judge Foster was not happy with them. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. When I pulled into my driveway, everything looked exactly the same as always. My little farmhouse, the barn, the chicken coops, the goats grazing in the pasture. But it felt different somehow. It felt secure, protected, really mine in a way it hadn't since this whole nightmare started. Roosevelt crowed when I got out of my truck and I laughed. "You caused a lot of trouble, buddy," I called to him. He puffed up his chest and crowed again, completely unconcerned. The next few weeks were satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. The local newspaper ran a story about the case with the headline, "Judge Dismisses HOA's Rooster Complaint, Cites Agricultural Rights." It was picked up by several state media outlets and even made it onto a few national news websites as a human interest story. I got calls from reporters wanting to interview me, and several agricultural rights organizations reached out to say they were glad to see the Right to Farm Act being enforced. Tom called about a week after the hearing to tell me the prosecutor's office had decided to file charges. Patricia Whitmore, Richard Colton, and 2 other HOA board members were being charged with harassment and filing false reports. They were misdemeanors, not felonies, but they carried potential fines and even jail time for repeat offenders. "What happens now?" I asked. "They'll probably take a plea deal. No one wants to go to trial over this, but they'll have criminal records, they'll likely face fines, and they might have to do community service. Plus, I'm hearing rumors that there's a revolt brewing in the HOA. A lot of residents are furious that the board wasted their dues money on a ridiculous lawsuit and then got hit with a judgment for your legal fees. Patricia might be voted out." That turned out to be an understatement. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a woman named Susan Chen, who introduced herself as the new interim president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. "Mr. Brennan, I want to apologize on behalf of our community for everything that happened," she said. "The previous board acted completely inappropriately. They've all been removed from their positions, and we're in the process of reforming our governance structure to prevent anything like this from happening again." "I appreciate that," I said cautiously. "I also want you to know that the HOA is paying your legal fees as ordered, and we're dropping any and all complaints against you and your property. We recognize that you have every right to operate your farm, and we're actually working on educating our residents about what it means to live near agricultural land." "That's good to hear. Some of our residents have expressed interest in buying eggs from you, if you have any to spare. And there's been talk about organizing a farmer's market in the community. We'd love to have you participate if you're interested." I was surprised but pleased. I might be interested in that. Let me think about it. Over the next few months, things settled into a new normal. The criminal charges against Patricia and the other former board members were resolved with plea deals. They each paid fines, received probation, and had to attend classes on property rights and harassment. Patricia sold her house in Meadowbrook Heights and moved away, which no one in the community seemed sorry about. I did end up selling eggs at the farmer's market that the new HOA board organized. It was held every Saturday morning in the community center parking lot, and it turned out to be popular with residents. I met some of my neighbors from the development for the first time, and most of them were perfectly nice people who had just been caught up in Patricia's crusade. One woman, a young mother with 2 kids, apologized profusely for testifying at the hearing. "I feel so stupid," she said. "Patricia made it sound like you were running some kind of factory farm and that the Rooster was just one problem among many. I never actually came out to see your property or talk to you. I just believed what she told me." "It's okay," I said. "I understand. People trust their HOA leaders to be honest." "Well, I won't make that mistake again, and for what it's worth, I actually like hearing your rooster now. My kids think it's cool to wake up to a real farm sound." I sold out of eggs every week at the market. People also started asking about the goat cheese I made, so I got the necessary licenses to sell dairy products and added that to my offerings. What had started as a hobby farm for my own enjoyment was turning into a small business, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Tom came out to visit one Saturday afternoon. We sat on my porch drinking beer and watching the goats play in the pasture. "You know," he said, "you could have accepted a settlement early on. Probably could have gotten them to pay you to get rid of the rooster without all the hassle of a lawsuit." "I know," I said. "But this was never about money. It was about principle. This is my land. I should be able to use it as I see fit, as long as I'm not breaking any laws or hurting anyone. The idea that an HOA could just decide they didn't like something and force me to change my whole life was wrong." "You're right. And you set a good precedent. Other farmers in the state have cited your case when dealing with similar issues. You made a difference." Roosevelt chose that moment to crow, even though it was mid-afternoon. Tom laughed. "Does he always crow at random times like that?" "Pretty much. That's what roosters do. They crow when they feel like it. He's a noisy bastard." "Yeah, but he's my noisy bastard." By the following spring, the whole incident felt like a strange dream. I had expanded my vegetable garden and was selling produce at the farmer's market along with eggs and cheese. I had even bought 2 more goats so I could increase cheese production. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA continued to be perfectly cordial, and several residents had become regular customers and even friends. One morning in April, I was out collecting eggs when I heard a vehicle coming up the driveway. I tensed for a moment, old habits dying hard, but it was just Susan Chen's car. She got out with a basket and a smile. "Morning, Derek. I brought you some fresh muffins from the bakery in town. Thought you might like them with your coffee." "That's really nice of you, thanks." We sat on the porch and talked about the upcoming farmers market season, and some ideas the HOA had for community events. She asked if I would be willing to host a farm tour for some of the kids in the neighborhood, and I agreed. It was nice to be seen as part of the community instead of as a problem to be solved. After Susan left, I went back to my morning routine. Roosevelt was crowing. The chickens were scratching in the dirt. The goats were bleating for attention. It was peaceful and exactly what I had wanted when I bought this place 5 years ago. I thought about everything that had happened, all the stress and anger and fear. But I also thought about standing in that courtroom and hearing Judge Foster dismiss the HOA's case and validate everything I had been saying all along. I thought about the principle of the thing, about standing up for your rights even when it's hard, even when powerful people are trying to bully you into giving up. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was a local radio station asking if I would be willing to do an interview about agricultural rights for a segment they were producing. I agreed, adding it to a list of similar requests I had been getting. Apparently, my case had resonated with a lot of people, both farmers dealing with similar issues and regular citizens who were frustrated with HOA overreach. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and I spent some time thinking about what I wanted to say. It wasn't just about my rooster or my farm. It was about property rights, about the importance of protecting agricultural land, about the dangers of giving too much power to HOAs without proper oversight. The day of the interview, I drove into town and met the host at the radio station. Her name was Michelle, and she was a friendly woman in her 30s who immediately put me at ease. The interview itself was about 20 minutes long, and we talked about everything from how I got started farming to the details of the legal battle with the HOA. "What do you think was the turning point in your case?" Michelle asked. "Honestly, I think it was the agricultural land classification. That designation exists for a reason. It protects farmers from exactly this kind of harassment. Without it, anyone with enough money and a good lawyer could try to shut down farms they don't like. The judge understood that, and she protected those rights. Do you have any advice for other people dealing with similar situations? Document everything. Keep all your paperwork organized. Know your rights and don't be afraid to stand up for them. And find a good lawyer who understands property and agricultural law. I couldn't have done this without Tom Richardson." After the interview, I stopped by Tom's office to thank him again. He waved it off. "You did the hard part," he said. "You stood your ground when a lot of people would have just given up. That takes courage." I was terrified the whole time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're scared. I drove home feeling reflective. The whole experience had changed me in ways I was still figuring out. I was more confident, more aware of my rights, more willing to speak up when something was wrong. But I was also more tired, more cynical about people and their motivations. I had learned that some people would lie, cheat, and abuse the system to get what they wanted, even when what they wanted was petty and unreasonable. But I had also learned that the system could work when you stood up and fought for yourself. Judge Foster had seen through the HOA's nonsense and ruled in my favor. The prosecutor had filed charges against people who abused their power. The local media had told my story fairly and helped other people understand the issues at stake. That evening, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when I saw another car coming up the driveway. For a second, I felt that old anxiety, wondering who it was and what they wanted. But it was just my neighbor from down the road, Jim Patterson, who had a small farm of his own about a mile south of my property. "Hey, Derek," he called out as he got out of his truck. "Heard your interview on the radio today. You did good." "Thanks, Jim. What brings you by?" "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. There's a group of us local farmers who are thinking about forming an association. Not an HOA type thing, just a group to support each other, share resources, maybe do some advocacy work at the county level. Would you be interested?" "Yeah, I think I would. What kind of advocacy?" "Protecting agricultural land, mostly. Making sure the county doesn't get too development happy and start rezoning farmland without proper consideration. Maybe working on programs to help new farmers get started. That sort of thing." We talked for about an hour, and by the time Jim left, I was genuinely excited about the idea. It felt good to think about being proactive instead of reactive, about building something positive instead of just defending what I already had. The Farmers Association held its first meeting a few weeks later in Jim's barn. There were about 15 of us, ranging from hobby farmers like me to people who ran larger operations growing corn, soybeans, and other crops. We talked about the challenges we faced, from development pressure to changing regulations to the economics of small-scale farming. One older farmer, a man named Carl who had been working the same land for 40 years, brought up the issue of HOAs. "It's getting worse," he said. "Used to be, you had a farm, people left you alone. But now these developments are going up everywhere, and the HOAs think they can control everything around them." Derek's case was good, but it shouldn't have been necessary. We need to make sure counties understand that farms have rights too. We all agreed, and over the next few months, the association became a real force in the county. We met with county commissioners, attended zoning meetings, and made sure farmers' voices were heard when decisions were being made about land use and development. It was time-consuming, but it felt important. One afternoon in July, I was at a county zoning meeting when I saw someone I recognized in the crowd. It took me a second to place her, but then I realized it was one of the women who had testified against me at the hearing. She caught my eye and looked embarrassed, but after the meeting she came up to me. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Emily Walsh. I testified at your hearing last year. I remember. I wanted to apologize again. I felt terrible about that whole situation. I actually just bought a house outside the HOA area specifically because I wanted to be near working farms. I grew up in the city, and I didn't understand what I was missing until all that happened, and I actually came to your farmer's market. Now, I can't imagine living anywhere else." "That's good to hear, and call me Derek. Derek. I'm actually here tonight because I'm worried about this rezoning proposal. If they approve it, there's going to be another big development right next to my new house. I don't want to end up in the same situation again." We ended up testifying together against the rezoning proposal, and the county commissioners tabled it for further review. Emily became a regular at the Farmers Association meetings, representing a new voice, residents who chose to live near farms and wanted to protect that lifestyle. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, I found myself busier than I had been in years. The farm kept growing. I was active in the Farmers Association. I was doing occasional media interviews about agricultural rights, and I was building genuine friendships with people in the community. Roosevelt crowed every morning, and instead of being a source of conflict, he had become something of a local celebrity. Parents brought their kids to the farmers' market specifically to see the famous Rooster. One Saturday in December, almost exactly 2 years after Patricia first showed up at my property, I was packing up my booth at the farmer's market when Susan came over with a cup of hot cider. "Thought you might need this," she said. "It's getting cold." "Thanks." I took the cup gratefully. "Good turnout today. It's been a great season. You know, I was thinking about what you said in that radio interview about agricultural land classifications. The HOA board has been discussing whether we should actually support expanding those protections in the county. Make it harder for future developments to challenge existing farms. That would be great. The Farmers Association would definitely work with you on that. I think it's important. What happened with Patricia was embarrassing for our whole community. We don't want to be known as the HOA that tried to shut down a farm over a rooster. We'd rather be known as a community that values and protects agricultural heritage." That conversation led to a partnership between the Meadowbrook Heights HOA and the Farmers Association. We worked together on a county-level initiative to strengthen protections for agricultural land and create clear guidelines about what HOAs could and couldn't do regarding neighboring farms. It took almost a year of work, but eventually, the county passed an agricultural protection ordinance that made it much harder for anyone to challenge existing farm operations. I was at the county council meeting when they passed the ordinance, and several people mentioned my case as an example of why the protection was needed. It felt good to know that something positive had come out of all that conflict and stress. On the 2-year anniversary of the court hearing, I hosted a big farm party. I invited everyone from the Farmers Association, the HOA board, my regular customers, and even Tom and Judge Foster, though the judge politely declined, saying it wouldn't be appropriate. About 50 people showed up, and we had a potluck dinner, live music from a local bluegrass band, and tours of the farm for anyone who was interested. Jim made a toast halfway through the evening. To Derek, for standing up for all of us and showing that farmers' rights matter. And to Roosevelt, the rooster that started a revolution. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. Roosevelt, for his part, was asleep in the coop and completely oblivious to his fame. As the party wound down and people started heading home, I found myself standing alone in my yard, looking at my farmhouse with the lights glowing warm in the windows. I thought about the morning I woke up to see 3 police cars in my driveway, and how terrified I had been that everything was about to fall apart. I thought about standing in that courtroom, not knowing which way the judge would rule. I thought about all the stress and anger and fear that had dominated months of my life, but I also thought about everything that had come after. The friendships, the community, the sense of purpose that came from advocating for agricultural rights. The satisfaction of building something real and lasting, not just my farm but a network of people who cared about protecting this way of life. Roosevelt crowed from the coop, breaking his usual schedule. I laughed. "Go to sleep, buddy. You've done enough for one lifetime." I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at my kitchen table with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Tomorrow Roosevelt would crow at dawn, and I would get up and do my chores, and life would continue in its quiet, satisfying rhythm. The fight was over, the victory was won, and my farm was secure. And that was exactly how I wanted it to be.